Life isn't perfect, and neither are we.
Nope. But we know how to face our fears
And have some fun.
and talk about all the messiest things of life.
Like the messiest things.
Get connected to yourself, get connected to others, and get connected to the life right in front of you.
This is The Connected Life with Justin and Abby.
That's me.
That's you.
And you. On today's podcast, we have a guest that I'm so excited for you guys to get to meet and learn about. We're talking about the phases of faith, and there's so much compassion and empathy and understanding that you're going to get to know from this podcast. So there's a little bit of lead-in, introduction time, and then we get into the meaty, juicy stuff, and I know that you guys are going to love it. One thing I wanted to do is I want to start a Living Fully Alive course, a second one. This year, I've never done that before, but because it's such an intense year for so many people, I want people to have access to hope and love, and we are seeing such dramatic transformation happen this year in our Living Fully Alive course. So if you are interested in that, email us at LFA, that stands for Living Fully Alive, at LFA at stumvalconsulting.com. LFA at stumvalconsulting.com. Other than that, sit back, relax, enjoy this conversation. You're going to feel so much love and compassion and hope for your story by the end of it.
Yeah, you will. Hi, I'm here too. Bye. Well, hey today.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Yeah, we got a guest today.
Yes. And here's the funny thing about this guest is the first time we met them is right now.
Yeah, in person, but
not in person.
He would woo me to sleep during my panic attack season. It's true. So when I went through my panic attack season, and do you remember those late nights, like at nighttime? Do you remember? For a solid month to a month and a half, every night when I tried to go to sleep, my anxiety was through the roof.
Yeah.
Enormously. And it would be this battle to get myself to go to sleep. And the first time I ever had a panic attack, which I think everyone who's had a panic attack identifies with this, you're convinced you're having a heart attack and you're dying.
Oh, I know.
And so for the first 3 days, I kept having panic attacks, but I didn't know that's what they were.
Yeah, you thought
I was
you were
like,
dying.
oh my God, I'm having a heart attack if I die.
Yeah.
So that was cool. But somehow, it's interesting, somehow you had found an audio.
This prayer.
On fear and anxiety that had this soothing music behind it.
Soothing music and then like this Australian accent.
Hello, child. The Papa loves you. God loves you. The Father loves you. You're going to be okay. This is a soothing dad voice.
It was a soothing dad voice.
But it's this really powerful piece. And so I would be listening to that. And it was a thing that I'd tell myself over and over again. Okay, he says, like I'd refer to this guy talking, David. I'd be like, he says it's going to be okay. Yeah. I'm going to be okay. The fear's going to go. I'm going to be okay. But I remember through some of the hardest nights, I could turn that on and it could get me settled enough and rebalanced enough that I could get myself to go to sleep.
Yeah.
And
no, he's got a great voice. I listened to that before I passed it on to you because I'm good at knowing all the things before you.
Yeah, all the good things out there. And what's cool is a couple years later, then I'm talking to Paul Young, and we're in our conversation. He's like, "Oh, I have this new poem. It's just one of my favorite poems. You have to listen to this." And I was talking to Paul about some pain inside of my life or something, and he reads this poem to me, and it just wrecked me. It's so good, and it happened to be this guy named David Tensen.
Same guy.
Same guy.
Found him on Instagram, and I got to tell you, he's a poet, he's an author, he's a father, he's a chaplain, he does leadership and development coaching. He pretty much does a lot of things.
Yeah, and what's cool is he has a DNA similar to ours, where it's like he cares about the heart matter stuff, and he has a value for spiritual matter stuff, and I've just super balanced is what I observed.
Yeah. Well, but what I was going to say is he just did a series on Instagram that I loved so much where he had people send in their personal stories and then he wrote poems about their lives. And it's so good. Anyway, I'm like, I don't actually know a lot of poets, and it is really fun. It's kind of like Humans of New York, but in a really emotionally connected. Humans of New York is emotionally connected, but you know, like it's like a very like grounded, connected, emotionally engaging.
Yeah. Which, by the way, David, are the poems that you wrote in The Wrestle, your book, The Wrestle, are they part of the ones that you like had people writing and wrote poetry about?
Do you like how I answered that for him? No. Go ahead. Welcome to the show.
Hey, David, what's going on?
Thanks, guys. How about you keep asking Abby questions about me? She can answer them, and I'll let you know when you're wrong. Those poems are that people wrote in they're going to make up a new book, which should be out in a few months. So I thought I should throw them in a mini book, a chat book, if you will.
Yeah.
So,
I've gone through.
That was special. I learned so much
about people and humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and some of it really stretched me too. I mean, we've been through a lot of stuff, you know, in our own lives. Bankruptcy, postnatal depression, not me, but my wife. A whole lot of stuff as well. But then to sit with others and to climb into their stories and use my empathetic superpowers and my Enneagram 9 merging is to move in and write something on their behalf. And some of the stories, when I sent them back to the people and said, hey, I wrote you this poem, they were just profound. So
it's validating in a way. Like I felt that even for stories that weren't mine. I'm like, I feel validated by just reading. And I like that you would share sometimes the backgrounds of the stories and the poem. To have somebody put into eloquent words what you have felt for years is just a stunning gift to humanity.
I think it is.
Yeah, and even the Wrestle, I've gone throughout portions of it and read stuff, and I'm sitting there going, it doesn't feel fluffy. It feels very personal to all of the human condition of what you wrote, where anyone could get in and go, oh, I can identify my story here in this space, my experience in it.
Let's start actually with the Wrestle. What inspired that?
I can give you a quick background which will lead up to it. Then we can kill two birds with one stone. Came to know who Jesus was at 17. Was involved in a pretty popular and strong church movement at the time. It's the Australian Assemblies of God, which became the Australian Christian Churches, which Hillsong was part of for a long time. So that's kind of the genre of churches. Got saved there, got involved with that for years, did missions in Japan for them. So that was at 17. So I got married, we had a child, did missions in Japan at 17, moved back to Australia at 31 or 32, ended up as a music director of a really big church here. When I say big church in Australia, that's like a church of over 1,000. We call that, that's the mega church.
Absolutely.
We have 25 million people here, so you've got to do the ratios. So I did that, and I thought, man, like I've arrived. And but at the same time, we'd had a third child. All our children's births were traumatic, really tough on my wife, Nat, and she so she's at home with the kids, suffering postnatal stuff. Is like, I'm not bloody going to church. Like, you have to go early and they have to drag these 3 kids along. I said, fair enough.
Good answer.
Lord, forgive her. No.
Lord, forgive her.
And then, and so then, but I ran out of steam, and the movement needed steam. And then I was kind of shafted from that role. And then I was like, F this movement.
Yeah.
And, that took me a while to get to that stage, because at first you're so attached, your identity's so attached to these things that have helped grow your group identity in a really core part of who you are, as it is with anything. People, everyone gets to, a lot of people get to that age, early 30s, and then they're like, all right, I'm kind of done, And so then I got involved in a healing ministry called Elijah House Ministries. John and Paula Sanford founded it out of the States many years ago, and they have some training schools in Australia. I went to that because during the training you get kind of to participate and maybe get some healing. It was a totally different, like, I'd never left my church. Do you know what I mean? Like, a lot of some people like, no, I've only ever known this church, this movement, and everyone else is the devil. No.
Yeah, totally
so
right.
I meet
That's what a lot of people think.
I meet my, yeah, exactly. It's like the small town. We've never left our town. It's like, I'm going to do really bad American accents. But that's the way it works. You can have a go at the Aussie one. You could probably do that, Justin, right?
A little shrimp on the barbie. I'm just joking. I purposely made that bad.
So I remember meeting my leader there. She was a charismatic Catholic lady at the Elijah House training thing, and she's speaking in tongues and she's waving her hands and doing. And I said to her, "You know what? You're just like us." And she pushes me on the shoulder and she says, "Nonsense! You're just like us." And I was like, "Yeah, dang right. Like Pentecostalism is only 120 years old. Catholic, you guys are old." So it was kind of opened my eyes to realize that other people liked Jesus too and knew stuff, and their stuff was different to what we believed. But in the process of that, I was like, I really love this inner healing stuff. I'd made it to the top of the ministry ladder, of course, spent good time on stage on Sunday as the music director and worship leader. And then but I felt so far from God. Like I felt, I don't know, that feeling. Like I've climbed this ladder. It's supposed to be taller. I'm supposed to be closer to heaven,
But it all feels so pointless.
So that's what happened. So I got involved in that healing ministry, ended up running that healing ministry, ended up finding I was really good at that. I could employ my empathy and all the things. I was like, this is what I'm made for. So I then spent the next 7 or 8 years in that space, left Elijah House because I just started getting invited around to all these churches. Can you come and talk? Oh, and we have some challenges within our leadership or within our own life or kids or whatever. Maybe you could come and pray and sit with us and counsel us. It's like, yeah, cool. So that was our income. That was the gig for years. So I traveled. I got to see different parts of the world, and I've gone to India, South Korea. Just different countries doing that, and met some amazing people. Some are still close and good friends. Others I'm happy not to see again. But I'd spent so much time under the hood. I burn out.
Yeah.
It was trauma exposure, right? Because you guys know about trauma. I think trauma comes in 3 main packages. First is all the bad stuff that happens to you, e.g., you're in a car accident or you're abused, physical, sexually, whatever that is. Or it's the absence of good things. So you didn't have a safe home. You didn't have parents who are affectionate. You didn't have blessing and encouragement. You weren't affirmed with who you are. If you don't get that, that's traumatic because you're made for that. We're created for that. Any social scientist will tell you. But the other trauma is vicarious trauma or trauma exposure, where you just see so much bad stuff, like emergency service people. You just hear and see so much. And if you are empathetic, if you are highly sensitive, that stuff just grabs you,
It's real.
And it didn't happen to me, but I was so close to it. So that then got me to a point, plus the travel and all the physical stuff, I physically burnt out.
Yeah.
And went off the road, did everything by Zoom before COVID, got really good at that, and then handed the chips in before COVID came. And then, so that's when I started writing poetry. I remembered listening to a podcast I don't know if you listened to the Krista Tippett's On Being podcast, but it's a lovely podcast. She gets great guests, and there was a poet called David White on there, and he shared a couple of his poems. They didn't rhyme. They were thoughtful, a bit philosophical from his heart. And I was like, I rewinded it, listened again. And I was like, this is my thing. I've got to David White says this really interesting thing. He says, we often find our future self in a stranger.
That is a great quote.
Yeah.
Do you ever just meet people and you're like,
oh, that's what I'm supposed to do.
Whatever you do, that's my next morphing. That's the next part of my evolution, is to whatever you have and the space you're in, that's where I want to move. You just feel that. And it's usually a stranger, right?
Uh-huh.
Have you guys had that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Tell me about
Once you can see it.
Tell me about it.
Well, once you can see somebody embody something, then you can become that. I think it allows you to remove limitations. And even there's so many choices of what we can do and be and how we can show up on the planet, that sometimes just seeing something narrowed down where you're like, oh, that's the thing that I've been trying to figure out for so long, feels really enlightening and empowering.
Totally.
Yeah.
I have a friend right now in my life that I don't think I want to be like them in every area. Definitely not. But they embody what I want to be like in conflict, like I've never seen before. And every time I do conflict with them, I feel this like hopeful inspiration, because I'm like, this is it. This is all of the concepts I've been mulling around for years and trying to figure out, and you are implementing them all, and this is what it looks and feels like. And once you experience it, you're like, yes, now I can become that.
Do you get into intentional arguments just to go, I wonder how she'll solve this?
I mean, here's the thing. I literally say, confront me as often as you can.
I broke your urn. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely. I have that with someone where when I saw their life, I was like,
you have that with Paul Young.
Yeah.
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 Who doesn't?
Like, yeah, who doesn't, right? But
some people don't. We know people.
Yeah, we know people are like, let's set him on fire. They don't want anything to do with him. But but if you meet him and you realize that he's a walking reflection of Jesus and all the ways that he loves, it's amazing what he's gone through. And what I saw in his story is he went to the places of brokenness. He was never perfect. He super owned the reality that his humanity is just that. It's his humanity, and there's a lot of pain and brokenness in his life. And he said yes to the journey of facing all of it. And what it produced was freedom and love on the other side. And I was like, that's the archetype of what I'm supposed to aim for, is to follow a certain path that's similar to that. And I said yes, and chose into that invitation. So
wow. Yeah, I had. I don't want to fanboy on Paul too much. I did that in another podcast, but anyway, there is something about him, and I believe, and it's just the Christ-like in him.
Yeah, that's true.
Is like, especially if you're chasing authenticity.
Yeah.
Just his capacity to love on people blows me away, and it's centered in joy. Mm-hmm. Joy gives you strength. That's what helps you endure. So I started writing poetry, and on holidays, actually, I binged on as much David White's audio as I could find. And he's British; he has this great accent. And I thought, man, this guy, I just love this. He was a close friend with John O'Donoghue, who's an amazing poet. I think from an Irish background. The Irish and Welsh, they just, I don't know, they can say anything and make it sound poetic. Here's the phone book. So that's what I did, and then I started posting it to social media, and people were like, oh, that's actually really good. I said, oh, okay, I'll share some more. I've always been really pretty active on social media. I think it's a great platform for the right stuff. And then a couple of years ago, when I was recovering from the burnout, and then a good friend of mine, Gary, met Paul when he came through for a tour with The Heart of Man.
Oh yeah,
which was The Heart of Man, crazy good film,
so good.
And then I was at this conference. I said, Gary, can I come down? He's like, yeah, dude, just stay with us. So I hung with my friend Gary, the pastor, and Paul, off stage quite a bit over the 3 days. But on one of the sessions, my friend Gary says, Dave, I know you don't want to preach, but could you maybe just say a prayer or something. I said, yeah, all right. So while they were both talking on stage in the interview, I wrote a poem and I read it. That's the Blessing for the Heart Journey, which has the word asshole in it.
I love it.
Potholes, sinkholes, assholes, and everything that'll make you whole. Anyway, I read that out, and Paul says, did you write that? I said, yeah. He says, when? I said, just now. He's like, do you have any more? I said, sure. And I sent them. He goes, can you keep sending to me? That's crazy. So then that's what he did. He started reading them on podcasts like your own. And as he traveled, and he's then at the start of last year, he's like, this has got to be in a book, Dave. Please put them in a book. People are asking me. This is you. I'm reading these and handing these to people, and it's such a gift. So please do that. And if it's okay, can I narrate for the audiobook? I said, okay then. So
I guess I'll let you.
No, so thanks, Paul. Get out of here. Quit trying to steal my limelight.
Look, I'd like somebody that's a bestseller. Thanks. So we did, and that came out in November. It was a long time coming. But you keep writing poetry anyway, so I'll probably release another couple collections
Love
this
that.
year.
Love it. For those of you listening, Paul Young is the author of The Shack, which was a book and a movie. So we went
with an Aussie lead act.
We want to talk today about deconstruction.
Yeah.
And deconstruction is often there's a lot of emotions. If you have grown up in religion or in church, there's a lot of emotions around the word deconstruction. I have watched that word set off lots of emotions in lots of people. Typically, pastors are terrified of it. Some people are terrified of it. Some people are, there's like a whole movement currently of people who are in love with it. So, and probably all throughout the years, it's just very popular maybe now to talk about it.
And some of you might not even know what deconstruction is.
Yeah.
But
so we're going to talk all things deconstruction.
Because we want to get into that because we think it's a vital part of any faith journey for anyone is to actually go through a phase of deconstruction, especially if you've been inside of it for any amount of time, inside of a religious institution. Structure.
Yeah. And both me and Justin have gone through, I'd say actually I've been through a couple phases of deconstruction. And we're going to have you kind of give, how would you define deconstruction, David?
Thank you. It's actually really, I'll give my kind of, the best way to talk about deconstruction for me, okay, first of all, it's a technical term, right? So if you go to college and you begin to learn philosophy or, semiotics, which is you learn about meaning, they'll talk about deconstruction kind of as part of your rigor, as part of that academic space. And so what you are actually doing is just pulling something apart to look at its parts separate from the whole. And it's interesting, when I posted that article, a friend of mine said when he went to college and was learning semiotics as part of his journalism degree, his lecturer said there's no such thing as deconstruction, all things are constructing, because as soon as you begin to take things apart, you are actually constructing something new. But I think the word makes you sound really powerful. I'm deconstructing. I'm not constructing anything. I'm pulling stuff down. But I always think about, if you ask most people who have been through their teen years, if you can remember back then, or if you have teenagers, which I have two of now, there is this point, 11, 12, 13, 14, depending male or female, and the family system, where things will begin to make sense. Like that's when the child backchats. Well, hang on a second. You do that, or you said this, or you don't know about that. And the brain actually goes through this stage where it sort of begins to switch, and particularly with young men, the testosterone makes us a bit brain damaged for a few years.
That's real.
But there is this, that's when your little girl has it out with mum. I don't know, Abby, if you might have gone through this,
I was an angel
but
child.
You just begin to yeah, I know you were. That's why I'm just going to skip past this.
I'm totally kidding. I was not.
I know.
Not at all.
So was there a time for you where you kind of went,
Oh,
okay, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that?
yeah. My relationship with my mom completely changed when I was a teenager because all of a sudden you are thinking for yourself and you're like, hey, this crazy thing you do is crazy.
Right.
And now I am old enough to decide I don't want to do this crazy thing. And I want to, and now I want to ask why are we doing this? And this doesn't make sense. And I mean, that there became a real sense of tension in my relationship with my mom and my dad when I went into teenage years, because you're starting to figure out what you want your life philosophy. You're trying to figure out, well, what do I believe about this thing? Like before they could say no and don't ask me about it. And you had to follow those rules. And somehow when you become a teenager, that thing where you have to just do what they say is gone. And like some of us had it. I mean, I pushed back on them a lot when I was younger, but it's like it just gets fueled when you become a teenager. And you're like, no, now
Right.
I'm allowed to. I have to.
Totally.
My hormones are raging so much inside of me. If I don't push back, I'm going to die.
Exactly. So I use that as an example because I think most people know what it feels like to do the things you just said in their teen years where, hey, that crazy stuff you're doing, no, it actually is crazy. I didn't realize it, but this is dysfunctional. You guys are nuts. And I don't quite know what not crazy looks like, and I don't know what I want to be. I just know what I don't want to be. I don't wanna be
Something
like
feels
you.
off and I don't want to be this.
Yes. So in your teen years, and generally during healthy deconstruction kind of periods, stages in your life or stages of faith, you do that. You begin to go, I don't want to be like that. And you can ask any teenage, because my daughter loves music, but she spends more time telling you the music she doesn't like than the music she does like.
Right.
And that's part of us. Like that's when we grow our group identity, it begins with, I hate this. I'm not like that. I'm not like them. I'm not like the skaters. I'm not like the skegs. I'm not like the surfers. I'm not like the bitchy girls. I'm not like the college girls. I'm not like the frat boys. I'm not like the, there is this, well, what are you like? I don't know what I'm like, So I love using stages of development. I think that's probably one of the best ways to look at it. It's how spiritual formation, people like Fowler and others have looked at this, is because it's actually not new, but I think it's become popularized now. Like you said, some people it's their thing.
It's like the
They're
buzzword.
like forever teenagers. Like, yeah, I have attached my identity to being a rebellious teen.
Yeah.
Or if I can just put it, I'm just going to stay here at this stage because I get attention. I can tell everyone to F off.
Yeah.
I genuinely think nobody knows shit about anything, but I do.
That is
People
real.
don't think I know a buttload of crap about the gospel, but I do. I hope you've seen Nacho Libre. That was the reference.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I'd like to actually talk through the developmental phases of faith, because I think that will help people understand the teenage phase, which is the deconstruction, which is incredibly valuable. So let's start with, what are the developmental stages in faith?
In faith. So one of the book I'm going to reference now is a book by called The Critical Journey by Hagberg and Gulich, and it's a fantastic book. And they take Fowler's stages of faith, which he based off Erickson's developmental work. Erickson did Erik Erikson. How's your name? Erik Erikson. Justin Justinson. He created this phenomenal kind of social science developmental work around, well, stuff we just talked about there. How you grow up, infant, toddler, childhood, teen years, etc., onwards to being an elder, and they took that same thing. And a lot of the work I used to do around emotional health, and I think one of the best frameworks is for everybody to understand. And I'd even say part of being a human, or for those that hold a faith, I think maturity is actually the goal of the Christian walk. Like you just got to grow up,
right?
Like into the full stature of Christ in you, whatever that looks like. So there are, in the critical journey, they talk about 6 stages. The first stage is that you recognize who God is. Okay, and I think that's the infant stage where, like a baby, just looks at everything like, oh, dog, oh, tree.
Yeah, everything's awe-inspiring. Oh my
banana.
gosh.
Yeah, I know. Oh, dog turd, whatever it is, I got to have it and I got to put it in my mouth, right?
Very true.
It's true. You eat dirt. Yeah. So that's when, and most people can look back. Like, for me, that was this stage where I just was like, I've recognized this is God. Could be like a moment in the forest or during a really tough season or something, do you know?
Mm-hmm.
We Christians call it getting saved, but usually that time when you're asked to come to the altar and say a prayer, that's kind of happened afterwards. Like, often conversion is quite something else and personal.
Yeah,
so that's
totally.
Number one. You're an infant. The next stage is what they call the life of discipleship. And you've got to think toddler stage here. So this is really important. I think often we tend to miss this. If you have toddlers and kids in that age or stage who can remember back to that time, attachment's really important. And so you can tell a toddler pretty much anything and they'll believe you.
Yeah.
Because they have to, because their safety depends on you as a parent.
Yeah, right.
or an adult, right? So you, during the life of discipleship, this stage of life, you attach to a charismatic leader, to somebody who teaches you. You start getting involved in a family of faith, and this is just like a really important part where you learn to walk. Yeah, you learn the ropes. You learn what this whole faith is about and who we are as a family, who we are as a tribe. This is who we are. Eventually, though, you know, the parents, and you realize, well, you know, mum's been feeding me and doing the dishes and so on. I want to do that as well. And so the next stage is where you get involved in serving, in service. We call that the productive life. So you've sat in sermons long enough. It's time to stack chairs. It's time to get involved. We're having and this is for those that have been involved in church life. You'll see this all the time. All right, we're going to have a whole series on giftings, and because we are called to serve the Lord, not just be listeners of the word, but doers of the word. And so ways that you can help. We're going to do a course over 4 weeks where we're going to discover your strengths and what you're good at, and we're going to place you in a place of service here. And you're like, yeah, you know, like, I get to brush my own teeth. I get to help around, you know. So that's the stage, right? Yeah. You just are like, yeah, I can do that. I can sing. Yeah, I can sew. I can do that. And that's the productive life. Then that's stage 3. So being recognition of God, stage 1, the life of discipleship, stage 2, productive life, stage 3.
I actually just want to make a note, because I know that as we're going, I'm listening and I'm like, for people who've been through these stages, I think they can often look back with anger or bitterness or frustration about the different things that occurred in the different stages, instead of just recognizing that's like the natural life cycle in it. So I know, like, a lot of people, stage 2, when you're a toddler, and people are kind of giving you rules about, like, do this, don't do this, or like a lot of people get involved in churches where there's a strong culture. That's what we're drawn towards. And so inside of culture, there's a lot of shoulds. And so when you go back and you look back, you can get really, really frustrated at that. And this is not either about if you get frustrated or not, but the concept of, when you're talking, I can remember all of these phases in my relationship with God. And it's so easy to just decide to write off the entire phase as bad. Or if I would have been around different people, it wouldn't have been like this. Or if I would have found, like, it's very easy to do that, instead of like, no, oftentimes toddler phase is going to be messy. Whatever religion, and this is true. This isn't just true in Christianity. This is true in every religion,
That's right.
where you actually have
correct. And they wrote the book and said, this may be your.
I want to follow this, and then you go and you start learning the rules of the culture and the lay of the land, and then you serve and you get involved and you become a part of that, and I think I can look back and be like, oh, I think I've written off some of the servant parts or some of the toddler parts.
Right.
I think I've written those off instead of actually being like, no, that's a natural part of the progression, and it's important, even if there's things then that I had to
there's things that were messy or belief systems that incurred through that I have to tear apart. There was a gift of development inside of each stage.
Yeah.
That's when you can't deconstruct unless there's been a construction.
Yes.
Exactly.
I use this analogy, the horse lovers will like this. Two girls, one kind of grew up around horses, riding horses, learned everything, about horses that she could. She grew up in a home where mum and dad rode a horse. Eventually she got her own horse, her own saddle, all her own gear. This is very much part of it. That's girl one. Girl two, she didn't grow up around horses, but she just got an idea when she saw a friend riding. Oh, that'd be really cool. I'd like to do that. So she went and did a quick horse riding course.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if there's such a thing, but let's pretend. And then, so both girls go out for a ride, and the crisis comes, and they both fall off their horse. Right? Girl one, who has learnt horses, learnt the beauty of horses, fallen in love with horses, is pretty disheveled, right? She's pretty disrupted. She's like, dang it. All right. But something in her says, you know what? No, there's good here. The horse community's not perfect, but they're good. I like horses. Girl two's like, screw this. I'm joining the anti-horses club, and don't fall off anymore. Horses suck ass. And so there is, in that deconstruction world, the next kind of stage after some kind of a crisis, I think there are two parties. There's those, I think I can hear that in your voice and mine, to say, you know what? If I look back, it was pretty shit. I had to do, it was cost a lot. I had to handle a lot of dung, had to heap a lot of dung, feed a lot of things, serve a lot, got hot and sweaty, but something inside me says horses are worth riding.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's others in this deconstruction journey that, I'm just going to say it, they never really learnt to ride. They just didn't have, or they were just in a place with really bad horses, or they weren't horses, they were ponies.
They were donkeys.
Or there were those merry-go-round, they were donkeys. Yeah. They were donkeys, or there was those merry-go-round horses. Like the whole thing was a sham. So does that make sense? I think there's this, for me too, it was like, no, I'm not throwing the whole thing away. I can't. There is something beautiful and mystical and magical here. I can't do that. But if we're talking about God, the irony is, even if you leave him, he doesn't leave you. Like he's like the horse that every time you turn around, he's hiding in the shadows. Hey, what's up?
Well, and that's what I really believe, that God is not afraid of deconstruction. And one of the things I was thinking about, because there's been, I would say the last 2 years were so hard in my life. I literally thought, I get it. I get why people have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. When so many things hit a crisis, and they were things that you believed full-heartedly your whole life, and then it doesn't look like what you have been told is true. And I've seen this happen with a lot of people. Crisis often instigates a deconstruction phase. And so I have this duality inside of me when we talk about deconstruction, where I'm like, I have so much empathy. And if you've grown up around spiritual abuse, and that's what I think, even like girl number 2 you're talking about, who never learned to ride, like sometimes it's been so tainted, you don't know how to not throw out the baby with the bathwater. So traumatic. Yep. So I think that there's genuinely things like that. And for people who have walked away completely, I understand. sometimes pain is so,
Totally.
I think about pain, it feels so much like an eclipse where, what is it? When the earth is in the right place, it completely covers the moon, is what an eclipse is. Is that right? Wouldn't it be funny if that's not what it is at all? But
both men are nodding. Yeah,
Sure, whatever. Yeah.
but the idea, like, I've been in so much pain that it does completely eclipse the amount of experiences I've had my whole life, the amount of beauty and wonder. And sometimes it feels easier to be like, I'd like to light a match on fire of all that I've gone through and start completely over. That feels way easier to me
than having to shovel through all of it and pick up the pieces and clean it all up. Totally. As a quick side note, and we're going to keep getting into the inward journey as the next step phase, but I don't think that very few people ever walk away from God. I believe most people walk away from the version of God that's been presented to them.
Correct.
The expression of God because when you meet with unfailing love in a personal way, no matter how bad the circumstance is, that personal connection, if we have that personal connection with that authentic expression of unfailing love, we go, oh, I don't want to walk away from this. No. Yeah. Like this humanity, this messy humanity over here has nothing to do with him anyways. But it's really hard to separate our messy humanity and how we interact with each other from this unfailing love that is God. And so I think I think that's part of the deconstruction phase, is trying to separate what is humanity and what actually is the nature of who God is.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a poem in my book called Kind of Way. I don't know if it's the one that Paul wrote, but it kind of touches on that whole thing. Paul read, I wrote, he read. Yeah, and it's like you've got to discover God in a different way. Like the teenager has to discover what life really is on their own terms.
Right.
Which is different, you know. And because they live in a different time and a season, and they're in a different home than their parents grew up in. I mean, maybe not physically, that's what happened, but, structurally. So the next life, some kind of crisis will come. Now, sometimes in this next stage, guys, there's this subtle, it can be really subtle. And sometimes it can be like a major crisis event. But I'd say this, out of the 6 stages, and we've just talked about the first 3, you can prescribe those. And churches and religious organizations and institutions of all kind will have ways that you can do the first 3 steps. You can come to God, then we have discipleship class and a way that you can serve. And some ministries, let's take Alpha, they do stage 1 like the bomb. Yeah. They're amazing, right? Here's how you can discover who God is. Good, safe, nice environment. Then you have people who are like, we're just going to disciple. We're going to disciple. That's what it's all about. Jesus said, go out and make disciples. And they're great at it. They teach biblical stuff. They're phenomenal. Some people, and the denomination I was part of, they had a great atmosphere around service. We're going to get involved. If you want to belong, it's easy. Just come and serve. This is part of the culture here. And we're going to create lots of space and programs and we're going to create a system that has a spot for you to serve because it's important. And it is. So you can build programs, churches, ministries around those 3 stages. And like bringing somebody through to teenage years before they leave home, it's kind of prescribed. This is what it's good and healthy and looks like. But the next 3 stages, no prescription. This is where it gets messy, individual, totally different.
Here we go.
So one day you're like, I'm done with stacking chairs. I'm done with this music ministry. I'm done preaching. I'm done traveling. Because for us, a couple of things happen. I'll give you an example for me. The way that God was presented to us was God of the breakthrough. We're going to pray. We're going to believe. God's got good things in store for you. Jeremiah 29:11. Don't read the other verses, but around that, we're gonna go and do this, and then my wife has like her 3rd really traumatic birth and is hitting postnatal depression, and I don't have a container for that and neither does anyone in the leadership and in the church, and I'm like, all right, what the hell am I supposed to do? Like, God is the God of the breakthrough. He's the healer. Yeah. He's the redeemer. He's our savior. He's our, good time. Come on, let's go, God. And And I was like, I don't have space for this. At the same time, somebody introduced me to reading some of Richard Rohr's material. I'm like, dude, Catholics have a theology for suffering.
Yeah.
Brennan Manning, if you've read Brennan Manning's stuff. Or, I was like, dude, dang it. I've been ripped off. That crazy stuff you said about God always being good and all the time, and if you tithe and give you money. We also went financially bankrupt. I'm like, people say, you tithe and look after God, he'll look after you. Myth busted, bullshit. It's not how it works.
Yeah.
So we hit this crisis.
Totally.
And we hit this crisis and we thought, I'm done. So I had to just start rediscovering God, and that's what this stage 4 looks like, is a place of crisis. So often this leads us into this inward journey, and you've got to be able, because all we have about God, I believe, is a concept of God.
Yeah.
Like, there is God in us, but our mind or our structures, or even the way we're talking now, that's just a concept of God. That's not who God is. So my concept of God had to be rearranged because my experience dictated things were a bit different. You know what that's like. So that's stage 4. That's the inward journey. And I'm grateful for where I was led and what was available to me, which was this inner healing ministry, and then all the others that I got involved in after that, because I got kind of, if I can say this, I fell into stage 4, the inward journey, in a place that championed and encouraged people, dig in, dive deep. And you've got to understand that this is as much about you and your development and maturity as anything else. So we're going to include things like forgiveness and honesty and safe spaces and all these things. And so that can look like a million things for other people. And in stage 4, they have this thing called the wall. And the wall is that thing that you hit where your will pushes up against God's. And you have this Garden of Gethsemane, which is where Jesus is like, not my will, but yours. And you will try, in the book, I won't go through it, but in the book, they talk about some really clever ways of people try and get over it. Some people do the worm under it. I'm worth nothing. But at the end of the day, you don't get to move through the wall the same person. Like, you just have to be different. You have to see God different. You have to see yourself in the world different. And, but I should say this too, up until this point, you can get stuck in any stage.
Yeah. You
can get stuck in stage 2. You can just be a lifelong disciple. You can be rigid and don't want to move on. You can be in stage 3 and just think, no, it's all about service and avoid every crisis. So that's stage 4. Quickly, stage 5.
Which you talked about in what you wrote, was getting stuck in that teenage stage. A lot of people get stuck in that.
People get stuck in that. And I think it's unfortunate.
Yeah. Getting stuck in
I know my heart goes out to them.
Getting stuck in the teenage phase would be like where you get stuck in skepticism and rebellion and pushing against everything, but not really finding your own peace in what you're for. Is that how you describe it, or how would you describe?
Yeah, same thing. So you might find a gang that feels the same way. So you've got a tribe of other people in that thing. Mm-hmm. But what are you contributing and where are you going? So my degree's in change. I have a leadership degree, which includes stuff around organizational change and design. So even in change management theory, there is this whole idea of if you bring something through change, it has to go through 3 phases. First, it's frozen, which is the state it's in. Then it has to be unfrozen, and then it has to be refrozen. And each stage has its own delicacies. So nothing's new here. Life, death, and resurrection. Like, Jesus was alive, then he died, then he resurrected. St. John of the Cross talked about the dark night of the soul. We see this in our teenage years where we deconstruct, and then you get to your 20s and 30s and you're like, actually, this is what I want to do. This is what I'm going to have a go. So any of the stages I've talked about now, you could spend 10 years in discipleship and then you move into the next stage, even though you're still being discipled, but you're not quite as connected to that, and the next stage. And then you might jump into touch stage 4 and you're like, no, this is too scary. Right. I'm going back to serve. Service is the right thing. So you can regress and go back. And as you said, Abby, I think I've had a few stages of deconstruction. Sure. Because once you move through that, you're going to come across something else, and you might revisit stage 4 again of going, okay, but you know what the battle's like.
Yeah.
Now, like you're like, I know what this tastes like. I know what it looks like. I don't like the taste, but I know what the other side, and I know how to get through this. I know that when I hit the wall again, and I've probably done that a couple times as well, is a couple of monumental times in my life that were marked by different things, mainly of me letting go of ways that I had constructed my life and my views of me and God and others. That's what it came to. So, but the crisis could be anything. Could be a religious crisis, physical crisis, marital, emotional, anything, where you just are like, okay, I need something's not working here. So the next stage is the outward journey.
Yeah.
And then, which is where, you once did the course and you were like, hey, here's how you're really strong. What you learn in stage 4 is you're really not the shit.
Yeah.
Like you're really,
you're
not that good. Like those strengths, they're worth nothing. Here's where you suck. Here is your weakness. Here is your exposure. Here is your vulnerability. Thanks, Brene Brown. Here is what it looks like to be you. Here are your giant gaping holes. And then you move to this next stage, the outward journey, and you may return to where you were before. You may go back to what you were doing at a church or in a work community, but you're a different person. Yeah. Or you just move on to something totally different, which I respect either, because you can't prescribe what happens now, but this is the next. And then you move on to, well, we just talked about Paul Young before, the elder stage, right. the life of love, where you're just that person that is like, I just genuinely love Jesus. I love God, whatever that looks like. I love people. And I've built a capacity now that I can pretty much sit in any space and still be myself. I can regulate myself, and I can add value and love and beauty to the world in what I do, however big or small that is. That's kind of the goal at the end. But it's not until stage 4 till you can say, for those that aren't kind of from a Christian background, one of the famous quotes people often say is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Or they say, in my weakness, he's made stronger. You can't say that at stage 3 because it's all about you, really.
No,
but by stage 4, you're like, yeah, you can say it, but I laugh. I'm like,
it's all a Christian fortune cookie. It's like, it sounds nice. Oh, look what this says, until you've hit crisis and your life has been turned upside down.
This is the only thing that is very true, that I am completely weak.
Yep, for years. I'm not. So you could spend. I've been 7 or 8 years in this stage. I only just feel in the last 1 or 2 years that I'm creeping out of it.
Yeah,
like I've spent 7 or 8 years in this stage of, okay, this is, so people, some of you might have young listeners, they're like, I'm at stage 4. And I've talked about this in public a lot. And I'm saying you may have this on a micro stage. Yeah. Like you can take this life model, this critical journey, and you might find little tastes of it. So you might dip into something for a few months and then move on. Like if you imagine something that spirals small and then becomes really large. But when it's a lifetime and it's over years, then you'll know. Then you'll know that no, this is long term.
You'll know when everything's fallen apart and you've really had.
Well, this feels like, this is honestly, and I think for a long time I thought there was something wrong with me because I grew up in a church culture where you should be able to pray a season gone or a hardship gone or whatever,
pray hard enough and it goes away.
Certain amount of time. And so the idea of having to be working through, and for me it's been every area of my life. I've had to deconstruct, like, well, what do I believe about God's nature towards me? Who do I see myself as? Half of the deconstruction season for me, or this inward journey for me, has been what you're saying, the great humility.
Yeah.
When crisis gets so big, you start looking at yourself and you're like, wait, I really thought that I should be telling everybody how to live. I really thought that I knew everything for sure. Yeah. In stage 1, 2, and 3, I knew it. I knew exactly, and there was black and white rules, like this is the right thing to do and the wrong thing, and this is how it will always work out. And if you do the right thing, it will always end up like this. Like it was very clear. And then you get into an inward journey, stage 4, and you're like, I don't know. I don't know how the world works. I'm really screwed up. I'm as screwed up as to me, this is the reckoning where I like become one with humanity. I no longer think I'm above humanity. I no longer think I'm better than the people next to me just because I was able to follow rules really well for the first however long. I can see that I genuinely have a need for God. Like I genuinely, that's not even lip service. It's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know what I'm going to become like if God's not involved.
Exactly.
It's and what I am sad about is what you're talking about is very rarely talked about in churches as a beautiful gift, as a transformation process, as the death to, maybe not in churches, in the culture that I grew up in or that I am in currently. Yes. The culture I'm in currently is so focused on positive that there is not a place, a box. I was thinking that the other day. I had this moment of shame. I was speaking at the church that I go to on something, and I was talking about being sick and how long I've been sick for and what that journey has been like. And I walked off the stage and I felt this shame, and I was like, I personally don't feel shame about it. Like I was like, I know the journey I've been on, and I know that it's the journey for me to become who I want to be. I know this is a beautiful gift, the journey that I'm in. But I was like, I feel shame because this culture has no box for somebody who's been in this for 8 years. Like they don't have a box for just constantly sick. So I feel like I should be done by their standards, but I'm not by their standards. So it's the idea of beginning to find your own, and that's the teenage part a little bit, is I can find my own identity. I can decide that I'm okay with me where I'm at, whether or not this group thought thinks that they're okay with it. But then there is the process of, well, what do I think about it? That's the teenage thing too. Like, well, what do I think? Yeah. Do I think that suffering is actually valuable? Because I've been in this culture where there hasn't been a lot of value placed on suffering, but I'm going through it. So I would really like it to be valuable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that there's that tension that a lot of people can't hold, which is a value for suffering and a value for healing and goodness and joy. Like there's joy cultures that are just like, we're just supposed to live a life of joy. And then there's cultures that's like suffering is the end all be all. And I'm like, no, there actually has to be a marriage between those two realities, because there's something when we are in a midst of suffering, something's revealed inside of us about who we are and who God is to us as a faithful father in the midst of our pain, our loss, our tragedies, in the midst of our humanity. And to get rid of suffering altogether is to get rid of a core part of our human experience and our humanity. And equally so, to only live in suffering gets rid of a part of our human experience, which is supposed to be life and abundant life, an experience of abundant life.
I think this is why Paul Young was such a great template for me, because I saw him go through an 11-year journey of figuring out what he thought, who he was, being humbled, going through suffering in multiple areas. And I saw what it produced in him, who he became. Yeah. He became humble and kind and loving and generous and caring and compassionate. And he had something that looked more like what I thought God could look like. And so just seeing his life made me think, on the other side of suffering can be this transformation that is the goal. And
the nature of God is revealed in that. Because all of a sudden, all the fear that we hide behind, the insecurities, the pride is really the manifestation of us trying to prove that we're valuable. And all of a sudden, the desire to prove, or the ability to prove that I have value or that I have identity, I can't prove any of that anymore. And all of that stuff starts to get stripped away. And again, there's the revealing of God when all the things that aren't actually who we're meant to be and aren't who God is fall apart. We can't lean on them anymore. and all that's left is this love and this gentleness and this patience and this kindness and this compassion and this empathy, because everything else got broken away.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What is the season like for you, if you were to describe it?
I mean, I love what you said, because there's that scripture where I think there's that scripture where Paul says, I just want to know Christ, the powers of his resurrection, and the fellowship of his suffering. There's this sense of, you got to hold both in tension. You've got to be able to understand that there's power to raise you, but then you've got to also understand that, as you were saying, Abby, this sense of, there's humility here. Like, I'm humbled. The word humility or humble comes from the word hom or homos or hum, which means the earth. It's, you're grounded, and you're at the bottom of that ocean. And you're like, this is hard. I mean, I went through just some really dark and difficult seasons. Even all that I knew about inner healing and stage 4 life, none of that helped.
Totally.
I had to just lean in.
Uh-huh.
I was like, God, this is my jam. And I had friends like freaking out. If Dave's in the shit, we're all in the shit.
We're also effed.
It's kind of like the triathlete who's won all these gold medals all of a sudden is like, sick and has some blood disease. We're like, man, if he can't do it. Or,
yes.
There's this. So I had, it kind of disturbed some people. Like, I went off the radar, and so people were genuinely worried. And, but I just had to listen, wait it out, and see what else there was. So, but there's always treasure there. Can I read you a little poem here?
Yeah.
This one is called Dear Breakdown. So this kind of explains that season for me. Dear Breakdown. When I saw you coming across, let me start again. Dear Breakdown. When I saw you coming over the horizon, I braced myself. With your strong gaze and constant gait, I began to suspect you were on assignment, or I'd summoned you unknowingly. I'd seen what you had done to others. Their lives resembled wrecks, most lost hope, all sense of pride. And you were coming for me now, and I was unprepared. Sure, those people recovered and discovered they couldn't arrange galaxies with their false personas, but who wants to go through hell for that lesson? And yes, some claimed they loved deeper, laughed louder, and found their true selves, but who wants to submit to your painful ways? So much in me told me you were not welcome. Too many memories of failing and falling had me questioning your nearness once more. But then you had your way. I expected you to hit and run, but you were more committed than that. I had you all wrong. Sure, it hurt, and sure, I died many deaths, but you allowed me to see that I was never in charge, never that strong, and never going to wake up to the presence of all things unless you came to my rescue. So thank you, Breakdown. Thank you.
I actually had read this before. I don't know if it was on your Instagram or it was in the Wrestle. I think it was before the Wrestle, I thought. But
it's in the Wrestle.
Was it in the Wrestle? But I thought I'd read it before that. And it is such a powerful truth. And if you haven't had a breakdown, you don't understand it. You don't understand it till you go through it. But you're right. It's this beautiful like friend and gift all at the same time. It's such a powerful poem.
Can I read another one?
Please.
It probably does. Some of these things do better than maybe me explaining. This one's called The Descent. This is only in the book. This isn't published anywhere else. All that kept me buoyant became impossible to cling to. It held me at the surface, my head above water, my lungs full, my face bright. But I was sinking. I assumed gravity would be merciful. I thought if I cried out, you would reach down and pull me back to the surface, back to familiar surroundings, back to the life I had. But my cries only summoned exhaustion. My tears only added to the waters. No lifeline from you, no hand up from the heavens. The strength that brought me security was failing. I was sinking. With heavy hope, I gave way to the descent. The depths of despair were colder and darker than I imagined. My only possession were a pounding heart and pressing questions. How was I breathing underwater? Why did the darkness feel familiar? Where were you before? And why did I get the sense I was going to find treasure no man could afford? I had sunk. The poor, the mourning, the meek, the hungry, all feast here with you. This Eden on the ocean's floor. This terrifying baptism of acceptance. So this is where you are, in the company of lepers, in this pit, this grave, this den of thieves, amongst those with little to offer and those with nothing to lose. I am home now. I wish this great loss on no man, yet I wish it for all. For foundations are forged here, and true selves are discovered in the currents of grief, on the dark sand of suffering. Still, I still live on the surface most days anyway, but its riches and offerings do not compare to the brightly darkened treasure held in the depths, found in the descent.
It's so good.
So good.
I think when people go, when they hit that crisis point, it's very easy if they don't understand the 6 stages we're talking about today. If they don't understand that it's an invitation, and if they don't understand that there's someone with them much bigger than them to walk with them through the process, it's very easy to find themselves become bitter and resentful. It's very easy for them to, in their pain, try and vilify all the things around them that seem to cause the pain. Because if I can vilify everything around me that caused the pain, then I can alleviate the pain. So if it's the institution, or it's the relationships, and that doesn't mean that any of those relationships or institutions are healthy. I'm not saying that they don't need to change. But a lot of times they create a finger that points outward, and they try to escape the pain rather than go, oh, this is the invitation that exists for every human being for me to go head first into the pain. And if I don't vilify people, I can find humility. I can go into the descent. I can go to the deepest places, the darkest places that I haven't known how to go to, that there hasn't been grace to investigate yet. And I can go into those places, and love is willing to meet me there in that space if I allow myself to stay tender. But there's a group of people, like even when we're talking about this deconstruction situation, where they begin the process of tearing something down, and you talked about it as demolition, right? They start the demolition process, and they stay in the demolition process. They don't go into a construction phase where they go, okay, what am I going to rebuild on the other side of this? What is this unto? What is this supposed to reveal inside of me, to myself, to the world? What is supposed to be revealed out of it, that I can take it and move it into something else? And it's very easy to get stuck in the fear that we have when we hit these moments. And these moments reveal the fear that was already there, the orphan mindset, that part of us that already felt like an abandoned child. It begins to reveal the truth that was always deep under the surface. And so we can either be paralyzed by the reality of that and think that it's an outward thing causing it all, or we can actually decide that, oh, actually there's an outward thing revealing what was already there. This is the invitation to liberation, that I be liberated from the fear, that I be liberated from the anxiety, that I be liberated from the orphan mentality, that I be liberated from the self-judgments and everything else that's been weighing me down, and the pain, that like we could actually face it head on. One of the reason I'm bringing that up is that when people are listening to this and they start going through these phases, there's something that I'm here to tell you, that there's something so much bigger than you that is saying, I want to show you and reveal to you that I'm a really good dad. I'm an invested friend that wants to participate with you. And that's what I found in all of what you're talking about when I went to those darkest places, is that it actually illuminated this really good dad that said, when Justin came to the end of himself And when he couldn't get what he needed outside of himself from other people, he suddenly could get from a good dad who was really available.
Yeah. Yeah, so good. Yeah.
What are so we did the stage 4, inward journey, stage 5, outward journey. Now your life changes in some capacity. You never go through this. I think of Gandalf, like Gandalf was gray, he died, and then he came back as Gandalf the White from Lord of the Rings. That feels like this journey to me. He had to go fight a dragon and whatever happened, and then he comes back, he's transformed, and he's showing up differently because of that. Exactly. So that's stage 5, and then stage 6
is that life of
love. That's the life of love. And I like reading Richard Rohr's stuff. I like Brennan Manning, Henry Nouwen, these, and just people I've met over the years that they're in the last stages of life too. They may be in their 70s or 80s or 60s. It depends on what sort of work they've done. But and it's interesting because if you look at any developmental model that talks about maturity, there's this great ministry and teaching called the Life Model, Jim Wilder. I don't know if you've come across that, but they talk about the developmental stages of us as people, neurologically, and it's phenomenal stuff. But they talk about that elder stage, and the elders are there. And the elders are people who are have a capacity to love and regulate themselves and care for a community. And I think about people in our lives that are religious elders. They're not shocked by you going through a rough time. Classic example is when my wife was going through she always preceded me, her breakdowns. She always goes ahead of me.
That's Justin with me. He's always like a couple steps ahead.
I mean, yeah. So she said, I think I'm having a breakdown. She rang the church we belong to. She rang a home group leader, who I think might have been just a couple of years older or maybe even younger, because that's how those structures work sometimes. And she said, I think I'm having a breakdown. And the lady's like, oh, well, we'll be praying and just keep reading your scriptures.
Oh, man.
We'll see you on Sunday.
Oh, gosh.
She rang. Then she goes, oh, I'm going to ring. So she rang one of the kind of the group leaders at Elijah House. This lady's in her 70s. And she said, oh, I think I'm having a breakdown. She's like, that's wonderful. Let's do coffee, And that's like, what the heck? And it kind of like, then the lady was just spent like half an hour telling her how she made all these epic mistakes as a mum, and this happens, and it's natural and it's normal, and her joy conveyed, hey, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And I think we need more and more of those people. I do think there's a lack of people that have done the heart journey, right, the maturity journey, and are in a stage of life where they know how to look after themselves and love themselves, but they've gone through the stages of being loved, loving myself in a significant other, loving myself in a family, onto I can love myself in a community.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Now that takes a lot of maturity stages and concepts and things you will have to have worked through. I think there's a lack of them. I think also within church and Christian circles, particularly some of the backgrounds that you and I come from, they're undervalued and they're underused because they're not as cool, but they're the little old ladies or the older men that grab you after church and say, listen, I'm not just praying for you. I want to tell you a little story. And they tell you something and you're like, all right, whatever. And then you go away and you think about it and like, dang, that's really cool actually. And if you're still here after you went through all that, I'm in. I'm in. I want, if you are still in love with God, but more than that, enamored by the fact that he loves you, that you're his tender child, and that at 82, dang, I want what she's having. I think there's a lack of those either around or utilized, because stage 4 can take you out. You can move into the demolition.
Really can.
You can stay in denial. Didn't happen. Nah, God's good all the time. And you have these people who, unfortunately, they're stuck. And and they're useless. I must say too, because I work a lot with leaders. Well, they are,
It's
right?
true.
They're great for the rest. They're good for stage 1, 2, and 3. Sometimes they're the hero of those stages because they've never had anything go wrong. But I think some people are. In my article, I talked about 2 other people. I talked about the denialists. They deny anything's happened. Like their ass is on fire and everyone can smell it, and they're like, no, it's good. Like the guy on Monty Python,
Totally.
right? You know that scene where in the Search for the Holy Grail,
I laughed so
where he's
hard
got
to
all
say
his
that.
arms cut off. Yeah, he gets his arms
And what
cut
was
off,
the
right?
quote?
And he's like, "It's only a flesh wound."
Exactly.
That's what.
That's a brilliant way
And
to
then
describe
you have people who I forget what's the other thing I said. The other D was people who are devoid of it. So some people, and I know these people, they grew up in like really good homes. Maybe they were religious, maybe they weren't, but it was just solid. They had good, safe attachment. Their parents were maturity. They'd done the work. They might be from multi-generations of people who are just soul to the earth. They can go through hard times. I think of a friend of mine in particular. He lost both of his parents in the last few years, been through a whole lot of stuff. But when I talk about like my falling apart and everything, he hasn't. So they kind of are devoid of the epic journey to the bottom that is painful and everything. Like you've used the descent. They just grew up in a home that's learned how to put on scuba gear and get to the bottom, and things just go over the top. I think some personality traits are a bit like, you know what, I don't know, and they won't give you the platitudes of God's good all the time and you should do that. They just sit, listen, and they're like, okay. So some people are devoid not of the journey, but on the extremity of the crisis. They kind of they just recover and bounce back quicker. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I have friends and I kind of wonder at them, but oftentimes it is because they grew up with such a stable foundation around them. Like they really knew they were loved and they really knew they were going to be okay throughout childhood, that there was such a strong I'm loved and I'm going to be okay belief system that then when they hit hard things, they don't lose that belief system of I'm loved and I'm going to be okay. And so there is this ability for them to weather. And I do think certain personality types, I think, are more aware of their emotional fragility. And I think other personality types are more aware of their ability to be okay.
Yeah. And I do feel for leaders, like because I've still got a lot of friends that are pastors and they're in ministry, probably like you guys. It's really tough for pastors or leaders who find themselves going through this deconstruction kind of phase, this phase 4, this inward journey, and then they have to hold a whole community together that's on all kinds of phases. I feel for them because I was talking to somebody the other day, and they're like, you know what, the whole, being a gay Christian, I used to think that was you just couldn't do that, but I don't know. I've just come around and I've experienced this and I met this person, and they're like, if the me of a few years ago met me today, they'd probably think I'm a heretic. And I said, well, you've probably grown. But they still need to hold the space, because if they just got up on Sunday and said, hey, X, Y, and Z, career suicide. And we might go, yeah, good on you. But, their wife's like, so what are we eating for dinner this week? Because this is our jam. So I do feel for those people who have to hold that space, and I do see a lack.
I've thought about this a lot.
You go ahead.
Oh, I've thought about this a lot. That I quit speaking. I was doing itinerant speaking in churches for years, and I quit a couple years ago because of being sick. But then it turned into because I don't want to have to be telling people about who God is and how they should live while I'm trying to figure out what I think about it. And I thankfully have a job where I have other skills and can do other things for work. But I often think about pastors where there isn't room when they hit a season where they need to dive into the descent deep with God, because preaching from the depths is very discouraging to people. Like it's not encouraging to be like, I don't know anything about life, you know, like,
and it's very confusing because they're like, so what was the point of what you said? I have no idea. I have no idea what I think about life. Sorry.
But
every
I just
toddler
often think
and
about,
child, everyone in those early stages is freaking out. Well, if dad doesn't know, we're all screwed.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And so I just have a lot of compassion for, and I think this is where a lot of fake Christianity happens. And then people have really big breakdowns, because I think that when they begin the process of in crisis or whatever, and they still have to pretend like, no, I still believe all of the same things that I believed, or they still have to lead people. It is impossible when you're trying to remove things that you've believed in the past and figure out what new things exist. It's impossible to lead people on that journey without it being whiplashing and back and forth and a little bit chaotic, because that's what the season is like. So I just have a lot of compassion for that. And then I think some people try to stuff it down and act like they're fine until the crisis gets so big that now they just demolish everything and they light a match and run into a completely different life.
Correct. Totally. Yeah, absolutely. It's like they're driving a bus. They can see the fuel gauge light is red, and there's a whole bus loaded full of kids, and they're like, it's all good. They're covering it up. And they're like, sir, what? Bus driver, why is there kind of smoke there? No, it's nothing. It's just smoke machines. We're into that now. You know, that's good. Everyone's into that. And next minute, the bus catches on fire and careens off the road, and there's like the casualties are huge. You do see that often.
Yes.
And because I always do feel for those that are in those early stages. Like for my kids, I want them to go through that. People may think this is weird, but I want my son to go get involved in a youth group. Listen, be involved, get discipled, learn about who Jesus is, learn about the beauty of horse riding, learn how beautiful that is. Knowing that in the background too, that hopefully from their environment here at home, that you don't have to be perfect and you will see some discrepancy.
Yeah.
But son, I love God and I have a relationship with God. And we pray together, I bless you, and we know this is really real to me. You've seen the tears in my eyes and you've seen what I've been through. But you've got to go on your own journey. Justin, you've done story writing and all that too. So you understand the hero's journey, right? The Joseph Campbell's hero's journey of.
Oh yeah.
And it's the same in the hero's journey. There is always the lead character always ends up in some kind of dragon's lair or some kind of cave.
Yep.
And you know who they discover? They discover themselves. They discover who they really are.
Yep.
And then they have to return to community, the different person, and learn the mystery and the art of living in both worlds.
Yep.
Of the transformed me.
One of the things that.
Go ahead.
It's actually a quote that you had that I just loved so much about deconstruction is where is it?
People who get stuck in the.
You talk about how people who don't want to merge their past with their future.
Demolishing. It's people who have no interest in a future with a past. Just throwing out the baby with the bathwater.
I just thought what you said was so valuable, is taking who you used to be and who you've become now and finding that merging place.
Right. Yeah. I think that's part of the hero's journey for us. It's part of the maturity journey. It's what we did in our teens, in our 20s, and our 30s. And faith has the same stages. It has to run a course. And it becomes circular and it's community driven, and you have to learn to. So for me now, people are surprised. So, some people read my poems and say, "Oh, you must hate the church." And I'm like, no way. I love it. Like, I am the church. There may be some institutional discrepancies, and we all know that. But the church is people, and I don't have to go to something I am. I am the church. Right. We are the church, and it is a mystery that's caught up in who Christ is, and it's lovely, and it's beautiful, and it's also destructive, and has potential for all kinds of things. But yeah, it's good.
It's one of the things. I have one thing, then you can say, and then we'll wrap up. But one of the things I love about this conversation is I so often watch people when their faith changes or they deconstruct or they decide that they're different now than they used to be. There is such a shaming on who they used to be.
Right.
And so
shaming.
Even like, I can't believe I used to believe that, or I can't believe I let leaders talk me into that, or I can't believe all of that was so bad. And I just love it because the way that we're describing it is, this is the growing up process. This is what it is like. And there's I spend a lot of time with clients on getting rid of so often we just, when we change a belief system, we divorce who we used to be when we had that belief system. Yeah. We actually like abandon that person or shame that person. That person who was really eager and zealous to serve and who thought the world was really simple and black and white, and who used to tell people this is how it is, it's easy when we let go of some of those things to then hate who we were when we believed those things.
We lose grace for the innocence of who we were in that process.
And so I really like the concept of having compassion around our natural stages of progression. This is the journey that we all go on, and we can love each part. And when we start to, and that's why, same with, I've talked about this in religion can make you hate who you were before, but also deconstruction can make you hate who you were before. And anything that is ending in hating who we were before enlightenment, before the next progression,
quotation marks.
Yeah, quotation. I forgot people can't see me.
Yeah.
But it really steals from the beauty of transformation. And so I like this conversation because it's bringing love and kindness and patience and acceptance to all of the stages.
And again, it settles us if we're aware that there is actually a human process that exists for all of humans, that there's an invitation to engage that process. Then again, grace comes in. We have peace. We have a bit more understanding, even though we don't really know what it looks like till we're fully in it. But we have a little bit more understanding for it. One of the things I was going to say as we just wrap this up is I know that I have a lot of people judge those who go into deconstruction phase, that I've heard them and they just like freak out. And they're like, I can't believe they're doing that. And where's it going to end? And you watch their control, their emotional control over other people go through the roof, because it shows clearly that those people who have the fear and the anxiety about others doing it, it shows they haven't done it themselves. It shows that they're stuck at their own phase. And they haven't taken those steps, because once you've done it, you go, oh, I get what this is. Yeah. Everything's going to be okay. Yeah. And I trust in, for me, even me personally, I trust in Holy Spirit inside of other people, the God inside of other people, to lead them on their journey. And that's where I can let go of fear and anxiety over watching other people do it. I'm like, they're probably going to make some messes. They're probably going to have to clean up some messes. And in the end, all things get redeemed. I don't know what that redemption looks like, but we'll watch how that goes. And I hope that they don't burn too many people along the way as they're deconstructing whatever it is they're deconstructing, but I can have peace with it. And I know that it doesn't have to happen overnight. And that's one of the fears that I also wanted to acknowledge, is that people get really scared when people take too long. And like you said, some phases could last 8-10 years that somebody's in, and people start getting scared. Is this who they are forever? And we're not thinking about the enormity of someone's life and the process, that God's really cool with you being present with those phases and going through whatever you need to go through to get something worked out inside of you.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. One of the things you said online that I loved is, would you say what you do when somebody tells you or a loved one is going through deconstruction, how you respond? Or question, you have a question you ask, and then also how you respond.
If somebody says I'm going through deconstruction, or someone I love's going through deconstruction, I say, well, what was constructed before? Like, what was built that is now being torn down? Because that's the really important question, is what was there? What was there before? Yeah. How long were they riding the horse? What kind of horse was it? It's going to be very different for all of us, you know. But I do think it's necessary. I go out and absolutely think that a season of tearing down, or death, or unfreezing, or a dark night of the soul is absolutely necessary for our maturity. And I think it is a shame, or a pity, I should probably use a better word, that a lot of churches and institutions don't hold a space practically or in their theology for people that are going through this journey, the inward journey, where I think you have the greatest potential for healing, for restoration, and for really coming into who you are. And I do think that's a pity. And like you guys have said, it is scary for some leaders, but I do think it's necessary. And because there's a lack of that, then people on the fringes are going to create those spaces, and people are going to gather to them. And like you, I've heard some podcasts and some people, and I can taste the bitterness in what they're saying.
Yep, they're still in the bitterness
it's like,
and resentment.
you are being fueled by your hatred. You're the teen that knows everything that you hate about mum and dad, and you don't know who you want to be, but you've made a thing about being a rebel. And I get that. In part, I get that, because you may not have had a lot to cling to before that. May have been really dysfunctional, but friend, like, got to keep walking, grow up, and there is another stage. Like, you can't stay the teen forever. You just can't stay there. The world needs you to be a wise, old, healed elder that holds the hands of others that are going through this stage, not as a peer, but as somebody who's gone before them, like the Gandalf, like these people, and say, hey, you know, you can move through this. You'll get through this.
So I was just thinking about even how this parallels, like, we all know people who've been stuck in teenage development stage in just normal life, not just faith life, but they're stuck as an inward teenager, and you're like, no, keep growing. And so it's a beautiful, I thought that was a beautiful way to mention it there. And I think the anger part of grief is important, but when we get stuck there,
when we wrap our identity around that, and that's who I am now, which I think happens especially as people move it into the public arena. They're like, oh, I'm getting hits, we're getting talks, we're getting discussion. I'm having a better time and being more famous for being the rebel than I was the good boy. This is my thing. This is my thing now.
Yep. It's true.
Yep.
And we just swing from, my thing was being a really good Christian. Now my thing is hating all of the things that I used to love. And it's ultimately finding our identity in outward
So
things.
I would say for people who are going through that, find yourself a tribe, people like yourselves, consultants, people they can coach with, whose life is marked by love and not by hatred.
Come on.
Like, just find it there.
Yeah.
Let that be your first prerequisite. I want somebody that I feel safe with, that I can ask the big questions, but their life's marked with love and compassion, and they're just going to be honest with me, and not camp here forever, but they'll camp here with me for as long as I need.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that's so great. And I'll say, to end that note, it was like that with Paul Young, like, not to fanboy on him again, but it was, I don't know if I hadn't had him as an interaction, because I had been burned by so many overly religious environments, it would have been easy for me to stay stuck in a bitter, resentful space.
I think that's true.
And it was the way that he handled his response to people attacking him all the time and being harsh and mean and everything, and the love that he maintained inside of his heart when he verbally processed about people, and the way that he processed about the institution and the people within the institution and all of that stuff. that kept me like on track with like, okay, I have this person, an elder who exemplifies a life of love, that kept me from going off and just being like middle fingers in the air and trying to figure out how to burn down the institution altogether like other people have done. And that ended up actually getting me to a place of forgiveness, peace within myself, peace with other people. And it actually brought stability inside of my life. And no longer do I have outward things that are pulling me left and right. And I have that place of self-regulation over all of it, where I'm like, oh, I saw love that was regulated well, and now I know how to regulate myself well in that. So
Absolutely.
I agree with you, David. It's really good to have that.
Amen. Yeah.
So
Well, it was so good
With that-
having you on the show, David.
Thanks,
I
guys.
just love, I mean, personally, this conversation was so great. I was like, yes, this is what's happening to me. I called Paul the other day, and it's like, you just want to remember you're going to get to the other side.
Yeah.
You want to remember like the season doesn't last forever. And it's so great to see somebody on the other side. You're like, okay, you did 11 years of this. I can still do it.
It's so real.
Yeah.
But that's how I feel talking to you.
Yeah.
It's the encouragement of understanding. The more you understand where you're at on the map, the more you see that's not like a life destination. It's literally just part of the growth
that light at the end
process.
of the tunnel is not an oncoming train. There's light there.
That's right. Sometimes
Totally.
feels like it.
I would highly recommend people follow you on Instagram, because you have a lot of interesting poems and things you discuss and articles that you write. It's really one of my favorite follows. So if they want to find you,
Yeah, it's
do you want to go ahead
at
and spell it
David
out?
_Tensen, which is Tensen. I'm on Facebook, pretty active there, different kind of community, but and then my blog is davidtensen.com. My last book, The Wrestles, available from me in Australia, but Amazon and
On
everywhere
Amazon.
else. And watch out for the next
Highly
one
recommend
called
it.
So I Wrote You a Poem. That'll come out in a few months.
Love it.
Stoked for that.
Love it.
Thanks for joining
Love
us
being
today.
with
Thanks
you.
for your time. Love who you are and love
you
your
guys.
share, man.
Thanks, hey.
Love you, buddy.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.